Hello and welcome to Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph. Well, we are less than a week away from the start of the 2022 Six Nations, and we will be looking in depth at the weekend's games in our final preview before the big kick-off. The debate surrounding England's backline has intensified because not only has it been confirmed that they will be without their captain Owen Farrell for the entire tournament, Joe Marchant of Quins has gone down with COVID as well. Farrell suffered a freak ankle injury, and we'll see what it means for him to be sidelined until mid-March. We'll discuss what, if any, the effects of his absence will be, both in terms of England in general, but on the backline in specific terms. If England can go without Farrell for a whole Six Nations, perhaps it might be a useful exercise ahead of the World Cup. One man who is hoping to have a big impact over the next 2 months is Ellis Genge. The Leicester captain is enjoying a fine season at club level. Delighted to say he'll be speaking to us about what he expects his role to be ahead of a Scotland game this weekend. Elsewhere, we'll get an in-depth look at Ireland and their opener against Wales in Dublin this weekend. We'll be speaking to Liam Toland of the Irish Times to see if the Irish are confident of carrying forward their impressive autumn form into this tournament. We'll also recap on the weekend's action in the Premiership. Delighted to welcome back alongside me the former England centre, Tom May. Hello, Tom.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
We've been debating Owen Farrell, his inclusion, not inclusion, for quite a long time, actually. And we now know that he'll not be taking part in the Six Nations at all. That cuts several ways, doesn't it? What do you think the major impact of it will be?
I think any side that doesn't have Owen Farrell will certainly feel the effects. A, because he is a big leader within that group, both on and off the field. But he's also, a fantastic player in his own right. Yes, he perhaps takes a bit of a hammering from certain elements of the support base, but I think he's a world-class player. And whenever teams are shorn of their talent, whether it be within a squad or within an actual starting 15, it'll have an effect. That said, I think it's a really interesting opportunity for England.
Well, it does open up a lot of other selections that, if you mandate him to be captain and you want him to play, it shuts down other options, doesn't it? Because you can't play certain players alongside him, inside and outside, whereas now you've got free rein.
It does. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity and excitement as we move towards this Six Nations, not only because the teams are very, very level, but I also think within the England team, there's now a crop of youngsters that are coming through that are actually knocking on the door. Now, whether Owen Farrell is captain or not, what would be read into him not being in a team, should he be fit, is far more than probably it actually essentially means.
Yeah.
If you want to have a look at someone,
yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
There's a huge furor that's created around him not being playing. And I think England have got a real opportunity now to say, right, we have the option to play with him or without.
Well, let's start first. I mean, I imagine that Ben Youngs, whose form has been good this year for Leicester, will be a starter, not least because he's got so much experience and he understands the dynamics of these Six Nations. But who will be his partner?
Marcus Smith.
Yep.
I think he'll have to be Marcus Smith. Now, George Ford is arguably playing the best rugby we've ever seen him play. I think the problem for him is that Marcus Smith, whatever he seems to do right now, turns to gold. I watched a couple of the games during the Champions Cup, and the way he managed the team, where he came on against Cast, it just changed the mentality of his whole team. I think if you're going to play him, going back to Ben Youngs, you need to have that experienced nature next to him. At 9, just to sort of boss the relationship between forwards and Marcus Smith. I'm really excited about this tournament, seeing those two play together.
Well, we seem to have been discussing this for, with me, it's decades. But the centre partnership is going to be another one. Joe Marchant is not going to feature, which is a shame for him and England because his form has been good.
He played well against South Africa as well, didn't he?
So, what are you looking at? Slade and Atkinson?
I think you will find that Atkinson slots into 12. Look, we have to find ways to create a centre partnership moving forward that doesn't involve Manu Tuolangi, because unfortunately for him and for England, he's never really that fit, is he? Atkinson, for those that haven't seen too much of him, he is a massive unit, not in the same way that Manu is. He runs very intelligent lines and creates opportunities for those around him to run into the space that he almost creates just due to his physical attributes. You know, he can get his hands out the back of the contact area, I think, which is really important in modern day rugby. Balance him with Slade. He got a left foot, a really intelligent player, silky runner. I would like to see Jack Noel have a shot at 13, but I don't think you play Slade and Noel.
Well, they've got Italy's second game up, so
yeah, I think the fact that we see almost a revitalised Jack Noel is exciting for England. I think he's a fantastic player. Never gets tackled by the first defender, which is almost unheard of. And I think he gets England on the go forward when he does.
I'll tell you what's interesting, and this is not being dismissive of Italy, but they are not as good as the other teams. They're trying, and they are getting better, but so are the other teams. I can't see them winning a game, but it means this, because France have got them first and England second. France and England, when they go into the third round, are going to have at least one win. If they both win, it's the opening game for England and the second game against Ireland for France, they're 2-0 up, whereas other teams could be 2-0 down and virtually out of it. Certainly Grand Slam-wise, but if you lose the first two games, you're struggling to do anything above mid-table. Your title hopes have almost gone. You could have a situation where nearly every team has won one game, or you've got a couple of teams that are virtually mandated to be challenging for the title, and two big teams who are going to be struggling for fourth and fifth. And that's how close the way the fixtures have fallen is very interesting. And France and England are lucky in this sense. They will definitely have recorded a win, almost certainly. I apologise. I don't want to be dismissive of the Italians, but I just can't see them beating either of those teams. Whereas Scotland, Ireland, and Wales could be 2-0, or they could be 2-0 up or down.
Yeah, it's almost reflective of what we're seeing in the Gallagher Premiership.
Yep.
Any team on any day can turn out. And there's a big if around those two fixtures for France and England. Should they be 2-0 up, the people who've got tickets to Paris will be licking their lips because they're going to have a hell of a weekend. But I think there's a big if around can France topple Ireland? Can England go to?
Well, France have got Ireland at home.
Yes,
which is a big thing because statistically. I'll have to get my hands on this. I don't know what the percentage is for home wins, but it's large. Away wins in the Six Nations are at a premium, and if you can do them, you do your chances of getting towards the top and challenging, for the title, in enormous, disproportionate almost amount of good. I
think you talk about away wins. Then England going to Scotland this weekend. Eddie Jones, he started 2 weeks ago, didn't he, ramping up, we're coming for Scotland. He's obviously a team that he's hurting from. They've only won one out of the last 4 Calcutta Cups, and he wants to set that record straight.
Well, players should never be nervous in this sense. They should be keenly anticipating, but know the extent of the challenge. And Murrayfield, when it's full and when Scotland are playing well, is a difficult place to play. And I'm sure England will be trying to prepare for this. I just hope they're ready for the visceral onslaught which will come both on and off the field, because it's going to be very, very powerful.
Well, and this is something that, we talk about the untried nature of some of the elements of within England's squad. How do they manage everything else that's going on around the pitch? I'm more than happy that they can manage what's going on the field. It's everything else that's surrounding the game that could prove quite interesting.
Time now, in advance of the Calcutta Cup clash, which is keenly awaited by both sets of supporters, to speak to someone who will feature heavily. It's Ellis Genge, the England prop and Leicester captain. Hello, Ellis.
Hello, mate. You all right?
Yeah, first of all, can I say congratulations on what you've been doing at Leicester and the turnaround that's come there. How much do you think your extra responsibilities there have helped you as a player and with England?
Well, I've only featured really with England once since that, obviously in that Tonga game. It's weird, isn't it? Once someone makes you captain, people sort of perceive you to be in a different light. Sort of start speaking to you differently. It was the same when I had a kid. Everyone thinks you automatically grow up and leave all your sort of childish tendencies behind. Have I grown up? Yeah, probably. Am I aware of it? Not massively. I guess people listen to you a little bit more. You have to take on a little bit more responsibility, and I guess it just pushes your performance on the pitch because you need to perform for those blokes to take you seriously.
When you're looking at the leadership thing, I mean, there are umpteen books and articles on leadership and so on. Did you study any of those, or do you just take it, from your natural personality and see what comes?
Well, I was put into the role for acting naturally and sort of putting my own sprinkle of leadership style on it. But I've tried to educate myself, looked at other leaders, numerous leaders. It's tough, isn't it? Because like all the great leaders, I guess, there's so much knowledge about all the different things besides rugby union, unless you look at someone like Jono or people like that. I'm lucky enough to have Steve Borthwick, who obviously captained his country 40 odd times, I think, and then obviously was captain of Bath and Saracens and won numerous trophies. So Steve's helped me massively. Only book I've read, which I guess relates to leadership, is something called The Inner Game of Tennis. I don't know if you've read that book.
I know of it. I will read it now.
Yeah. Well, it's a good book. Steve lent that one to me. So yeah, I've read that. For me, I think once you've read one, you've almost read them all. I think they've all just got different stories, until obviously you find a unique example. So yeah.
Ellis, we've been hearing a lot about Leicester and the way they've gone about the process of recruitment and analysis and so on. Moneyball has been mentioned. I don't know if you've seen the film. Good film. Brad Pitt. Well worth watching. Can you tell me how that impacts you as a player? I mean, do they divulge these things to you? Do they analyse these things with you?
I think I was a little bit more heavily involved when obviously I was probably perceived to stay at the club for my imminent future. And then, as you'd imagine, he's probably speaking to Hamro and other people about the future of the club now. But prior to that, yeah, I had an inkling, I guess, of how we wanted to build the squad. But I think the most important thing, something that me and Steve have always kept very clear, is the now, and how we wanted the squad to develop throughout the year. So obviously we had a lot of young boys, and then probably myself in the middle with Tommy Raphael, Hamro, Jasper, a few boys sort of in their mid-20s. And then at the other end of the scale, you got Ben Youngs, Dan Cole, Tom Youngs at the time. So for us, it was very hard for the balance of the club, which is age at this end, kids, wife, complete different goals. And then young kids who were just trying to break into the system, really put their best foot forward, but enjoy themselves at the same time. And then obviously you had a few of us in the middle. So I think the vast majority of our leadership group was in the middle. The spine of our club was in the middle in terms of myself, Hammer, Tommy, a few others. And I feel what we've done at the club, which is helped sort of propel it to where it is now. And Steve's obviously highlighted that, is that put the best people in the best roles, in terms of like you've got people who understand empathetically where people are at, emotionally, physically, and just being honest. We've got a very honest, open relationship. So yeah, at the moment it's doing quite well. Obviously we didn't get the result on the weekend at Sale, but it's done us well so far.
Ellis, you're less than 5 days away now from one of the most exciting Six Nations campaigns that many people have been looking forward to. How has camp been so far this year, and how has it potentially been any different from last year's that was so heavily impacted by COVID?
They're just worlds apart, mate. I think we were extremely strict with our COVID rules. As you probably heard, we were in our rooms, not coming out, eating our dinner in our room and stuff. So I think in the Premiership it's tough because everyone's at different clubs almost. And like, although we had a lot of boys from one club last year, I think you look at like Scotland, for example, they got Edinburgh, Glasgow, where 99% of their players are out the Welsh regions, obviously. And the same with Leinster and those Irish clubs. So for us last year, there was a lot of easy excuses for us to make. I think with this year, just the way where camp's been, I think we've bonded so well off the pitch. I think that summer tour, obviously we didn't tour anyway, we stayed in England, but that summer test series really helped us with Canada USA, blood and a lot of new players who are obviously part of the quarter squad now. And obviously the boys been away with the Lions as well, coming back, and they get better and they want more, they get hungrier. Time will tell. Obviously we done well in that autumn series, went 3-0. But that means nothing, obviously, if you don't back it up in the Six Nations. It's a complete different beast. You're halfway through a domestic campaign now, which has obviously been quite attritional. A few injuries and stuff, but I think camp's been brilliant, like bonding off the pitch, new faces. Yeah, really exciting. But sorry to drag that out. In answer to your question, I think what we've been doing off the pitch this time around, mainly due to COVID restrictions, has just been significantly better than where we left ourselves last year.
And one player that hasn't been involved in camp as much as probably England fans would like to see is Owen Farrell. How much of an impact will him being away from the squad for the next few weeks have, both on the field and off the field?
Look, Faz is a massive influence off the pitch as well as on the pitch. He's a class leader. You've seen what he's done with Sarries and England. Big personality. He's not massively like loud and big and laughy and jokey in terms of like socially, but like he's just a great leader, all-round leader, great player. But you got to fill those gaps, and obviously that is a void. We spoke about, we've addressed it, and we've got a good leadership group. We said like the other day, what happens if the core of this group, like 16 players or 15 players, all dropped down with COVID and couldn't play? And we asked ourselves, do you think we'd still be in a good spot? And I honestly think, yeah, we would, with the depth and where we've put ourselves in terms of where we've geared ourselves to go towards. I do think genuinely that we'd be fine, which is obviously detriment to the boys of what they've done off the pitch.
Now, Ellis, I know you wouldn't say even if you did know, so I'm not going to put you in that position, but do you know who the captain's going to be?
No. I genuinely, no, you're right. I probably wouldn't tell you if I did know.
No, you shouldn't do either. But
no, I know, but I don't know.
Okay,
no.
mate.
And we've got a leadership group. I think, like a lot of people obviously think captaincy is a huge role, but I think once you go from club to international and you make that step up, the old cliche of everyone's a leader, not all the time. You know, sometimes too many cooks spoil the broth. So I think for us, we always speak about just doing our job. And a lot of the time, if you do your job to the best of your ability, firstly, people will follow. And secondly, not much goes wrong, which obviously makes it a lot easier for those people to make decisions.
Now, I was told that Eddie Jones' nickname for you was Gangster. Now, I don't know if that's right, but
no, not for a long time.
Not for a long time. Which begs the second question: how has your relationship developed with him since you first were called up in 2016?
Yeah, I guess Eddie almost seen it as like a father-in role, because I was obviously so young when I come in, 20 years old, living away from home. My old man's a big influence to me, and obviously when I spent time away from him at that age, I probably played up a bit, acted a bit of a bad boy, if you will, and trying to get in the scuffles all the time and training and stuff like that. And I think what Eddie sort of opened my eyes to is that it just drains you so much emotionally. Like, I've got a lot more to give on the pitch rather than just pushing and shoving, because as you well know, Brian, you can't hit anyone anymore. So there ain't much point wasting your energy trying to push and drag people around. And don't get me wrong, I'll probably be times where I will do that, as you seen 3 weeks ago. But it's in you, isn't it? It's the nature of the beast. But yeah, he's just been such a good guide for me as to how to channel my energy into being the best player I can be and leading in that way, as opposed to trying to be the old 1980s enforcer.
Yeah, well, I mean, mate, look, you have to play on or near the edge if that is what you do habitually. It's just a question of, in that instant moment, very quickly thinking, do I need to do this, or can I do it later, or whatever? But this is going to come up when you step on the field at Murrayfield. I'm sure you're aware of this. The physical challenge that they will bring straight away onto you is going to be there. You won't have Courtney there either. So you'll have a revised sort of back row. And how are you going to deal with that physical challenge that they will bring in all aspects, actually, set piece and in the at breakdowns?
Head on. Mm-hmm. Straight on the barrel, I guess. I can't think of a name in my head that would shy away from the challenge. I'm certainly not going to. And whoever takes the pitch that day, I've got utter faith that they do the same. Like, you know, mate, everyone who plays England always goes up a gear. Physically, it's always look. You'd be disappointed, wouldn't you, if a Test match wasn't physical, if a Test match wasn't intense, if the collisions weren't big and the game wasn't fast. That's what Test rugby is. That's why it's a step up. I'm sure Scotland are going to come with a big physical plan and try out. So I'd honestly, genuinely be upset if they didn't. So I look forward to it. I'm sure all the boys do as well.
One of the things that I think England do well, when they do it well, everything ticks off this, is when you can get some variety into the ball carry instead of just the one outs. You've got the balls inside, you've got the deep ball, the ball round, and so on. You, Kyle Sinclair, whichever the hooker plays, are capable of being dexterous and feeding so that the defences have to guess when they're covering things. How much work are you doing on trying to bring something different and pose different questions for that set defence?
I think like rugby just evolves so much year on year. I think at the moment it's probably gone back to a set piece dominant and kicking dominant game. But that's not something that we want to square ourselves off to. We want to be able to, as you just said, like bring the variety with the ball playing options and all that. But I think something that we probably forgot last year was that you got to go through teams first to earn the right to take an edge or earn the right to put pressure on the corners and stuff like that. So I think at the forefront of our mind is probably, let's go up front for, I don't know. You just got to play what you see, haven't you? Play to space. I don't know. I'm not probably the wrong person to ask about how tactically we're going to boss them around the pitch.
You're going to have several untried combinations because of people going down with COVID, and unavailability and so on. Halfbacks not settled, centre pairing new, back three new. How much can you get in training as opposed to, I know it's not like a game, but how close do you think you can get to fluency? Just being in camp.
Yeah, I think the biggest growth you got in terms of being in camp is probably developing relationships off the pitch. The big thing that Courts always harps on about is that if you play for each other, like you're going to be able to rely on that more than someone who plays for themselves. And yeah, it's tough. It is tough finding those combinations. And the hardest bit about this as well is that we don't know who's going to play. Obviously, Eddie selects a team, and we genuinely find out a day before you maybe. So in training, obviously you get the people who are in one team, people in another, but you always have to be conscious, I guess, of not just making sure you're all right with this scrum half or making sure you're taking past the black fly half, because as you said, with the nature of the game at the moment with COVID and stuff and people dropping out, you never know who's going to fill that role. But look, we've got a great squad. Everyone's involved to 100% in training. And yeah, we've got a good thing going. So
You talk about the squad, Ellis, and new faces, new energy, new enthusiasm within the squad. Who excites you? What excites you the most about having those youngsters in, and who's really putting their hand up and I guess leading when actually they've come in as a fairly new player? Who's standing up for you?
Right this second, we only trained properly once, I guess, last week, maybe twice, you could say, just because of the fire outside the hotel in Brighton. So we haven't been exposed to training with each other too much. We'll probably make up for that this week. But in terms of players coming in, I think there's like 16 people who haven't played in a Six Nations campaign before. So it's just a good opportunity. Everyone's excited. Like, you'd be upset if they're not. Like, everyone needs to be excited for a Six Nations campaign, and we'll train later on today. So I have to get back to you on that one. I haven't seen too much yet.
How do you think the Six Nations differs as a tournament from, say, the Autumn Series?
I think there's obviously significantly more history behind the Six Nations campaign. I think we played our first Calcutta Cup game against Scotland in 1879, 143 years ago, I think, if my maths is right. Which obviously so much history behind it. So does it mean more? I don't know. But obviously everyone, with all the history that you've seen between England, Wales, Ireland, obviously everyone being, and like Le Crunch and stuff like that, Brian's favourite, and the Italians and stuff, like, there's just so much history behind it that you can track and follow, go back, look at games, even last year, So I guess that's why there's a little bit more excitement about it. And with the Autumns, it's more or less people coming over and playing against you. It's Twickenham, I know, but with the Six Nations, going to other people's stadiums, like going up to Murrayfield, going to the Aviva, all these places, it just has a different atmosphere, I guess, especially when they're packed out.
You're absolutely right about it meaning more to the supporters, undoubtedly. I just wondered, it's impossible. I mean, I know players say, I don't read this, I don't watch that, I don't listen to this, but things filter through. Do you feel the edge, from the outside, or is that something you work actively to say, look, it's just another game?
I don't know, half and half. I think, as I said, you don't know if you're playing until later in the week, so you don't really focus on that. You focus on training as best you can, preparing as best you can, be ready for anything. And then as soon as, I don't know, say someone gets given their debut, I guess they get hit with a world of emotion closer to the time. And that's when they'll start seeing messages and their parents will be on their back, and they'll probably start feeling different pressures. So yeah, it's different for every individual. I guess it's tough for me to answer that myself. Of course I see people. I'm not the most popular bloke in the world of rugby. I've had my moments and stuff. So yeah, I get a fair bit of grief, but fuck it, it's part and parcel of the game, innit? Not really too bothered what other people think of me, to be frank.
That's Ellis. Look, candid as I knew you would be. Can I just wish you all the best and say, I hope that your personal development keeps going the way it's been, because I've watched your career right from the beginning. I know we had a bit of a tete-a-tete to start with, but I'm genuinely very impressed, mate.
Thank you very much, Brian. I really appreciate that. And
just go and win. Just go and win.
We'll leave it at that.
Tom, we're speaking to Ellis about the challenge that Scotland are going to bring, and huge passion and so on. Actually, a bit like England, they've not necessarily always started well, but they are at home. They've got the crowds back, and I think they'll be rightly confident about what they can do. In particular, what do you think England have to be wary of? And you don't just say Finn Russell.
Right, I'll rethink my answer then. Finn Russell is one of them. Yeah. I think they need to be aware of the ferocity and intensity that Scotland will come with. We've touched on it, and it's one of those games, I think, where if England start poorly and don't get out of the blocks quickly, then I think they'll find it hard to get any sort of momentum into the game. I think from a Scotland perspective, if they do come away with having beaten England, they have to then back it up. Like, they're constantly talking to Scottish friends of mine, and that if they beat England, it'll be like they've won the World Cup. I'm hoping they're going to listen to this.
They've got Wales,
yes.
Who I mean, with the best, who knows how they will go on in Ireland, because they've got such a changed squad and personnel.
But it's consistency that's been lacking for Scotland.
Yeah,
and I think now we're seeing a much more consistent selection for Scotland and some really interesting young players coming through. I obviously
it's
look
funny, isn't it? If you get
midfield.
Consistent selection, you tend to get better performances.
Yeah,
it's really strange.
When you look back to what was happening with France a few years ago, and they had 458 different people playing in different positions. But in the midfield, you've got the likes of Hutchinson, Redpath, who's only played one cap, I think, and he looked like he'd been there for 50. Chris Harris of Gloucester, they're really
Jones,
attacking players for Scotland that can actually open up international defences. Duhan van der Merwe on the wing. Hamish Watson, one of the sort of small brigade in the back row.
Well, funny you should mention Watson, because that goes on to a thing. When I've seen England struggle, they've got the breakdown wrong. They've either overcommitted or undercommitted. And conversely, when they do get that right, like nearly every other team, things go a lot better. But Scotland in particular, I think, breakdowns are particularly difficult. When they're on song, they get the right number of players in early enough. They make effective contributions, they're accurate.
And how many of those Scotland performances as a collective are built upon someone like Hamish Watson having a good game at the breakdown? Because it slows the attacking ball. It's a really important area, and you look at the likes of Tom Curry, obviously, Courtney Lawes won't be there. How much are those players going to affect England in and around that area specifically? Because
they decided this time around no Underhill, so you can't play, to all intents and purposes, open side. So it will be the back row selection will be very interesting. It will go quite a long way, the back row performance, to deciding England's fortunes, I think.
Yeah, I think. You couldn't ask for from an England perspective. You couldn't ask for a more mouth-watering fixture away up in Edinburgh. But I think Scotland, as I mentioned, England have only won one of the last 4 games. We had that crazy game at Twickenham a few years ago. And one of the most painful experiences of my life was the year before when I was sat next to Rory Lawson in Murrayfield and England lost. It was brutal.
It wasn't great last year either, to be honest with it? Anyway. Well, Ireland come off a back of an impressive autumn series, including down in the All Blacks. So why don't we speak to someone who can give us an insight into Ireland's hopes and expectations. We're going to speak to Liam Toland again of the Irish Times. Hello, Liam.
How are you doing, Brian?
It's all going to be plain sailing, isn't it? You've got Wales at home first and you've beaten the All Blacks and Leinster marching forward in Europe, and it almost looks seamless.
Absolutely. There's a lot of unknown unknowns, to quote Donald Rumsfeld as well, I'm afraid, because when you look at the autumn series, like we had some serious high points, Japan, obviously, New Zealand winning all 3 games, I thought, but it was the manner in which Ireland performed and won. And I think we can kind of sum apart New Zealand a little bit because of COVID and fatigue and, but you can't discount in our history, we don't beat them that often, so it's important. But I think the bigger story is if you watch the previous week against Japan and you see a happiness about how the squad are, you can visibly see them happy going on the pitch. You say, well, hang on, these guys are international players. But that happiness wasn't evident in the last part of Joe Smith's reign, I would suggest. Peter O'Mahony said at the end of that block that it was the most enjoyable, happiest time he'd been in an Irish squad. And that's a pretty profound statement for someone who's been a Lions Test captain. And it tells you a lot about what's going on. But the style of play Ireland are employing is really, really interesting. They have a back row that can play out in the wide reaches. There's an expectation and not a conservatism around that. There's an expectation around offloading. And it's a better style of game, which I think is the deeper story of Ireland coming into this Six Nations. Can they maintain that in the pressure cooker of the Six Nations?
Well, I absolutely agree with that. And Munster aside, because Munster are not quite playing with the freedom, principally because of the personnel that Leinster are, or Ulster, and maybe Connaughton, to a certain extent. What I'm seeing is, as you say, are parts of the Schmidt regime which were good, which are the disciplines which you have to have, and the accuracy of the aerial game, the chase game, the defensive game, but also then, as you say, players who are not only willing to play with ambition, but capable of being dexterous. Whereas before you had a back row, standard who would take the ball in a very powerful way. Now you've got people who are looking to offload. You've got people who are looking to break tackles. You've got people who are looking to to pass before the impacts. And I think that's creating much more, many more problems for defences, because you can't cover everything. You have to guess certain things. And when you've got that in your locker, and when it goes well, everything opens up.
Well, you could even see that if you extend it to probably Ulster, who've struggled in many seasons to try and get back to where they believe they should be. And you pick a guy called Michael Lowry, the little full back, and he is a beneficiary of the style that Ulster are playing. Like if he was playing in Munster at this present time, I'm not so sure he'd be in the Irish squad, because you wouldn't see the swashbuckling nature of him. Now, can these new players, along with the Johnny Sextons, combine with that kind of a happier environment and a broader game plan? The Six Nations is a more difficult, challenging environment. And can they bring that to that level? And I think you're spot on, Brian, that Joe Smith deserves enormous plaudits for what he achieved in Irish rugby, because it torrented its way down through the club game, through the school game, it's in so many ways. But what Andy Farrell has achieved to do, he has given guys, and I think someone like Jameson Gibson Park looks like he's playing on the beach at home in New Zealand when he plays for Ireland. And that's a wonderful thing. There isn't an Excel spreadsheet in his head dictating the terms and conditions of how he needs to play. And I've seen a bit of that in the Premiership with Harlequins, and there is a subtle revolution or evolution towards a broader game. Like the pitch is 70 metres wide, and we're seeing more teams playing that full width, which is really exciting.
You talk about 2 players there that I've got in my notes, Liam. Michael Lowry, I've seen him in a couple of times playing for Ulster. I love him basically because he's shorter than me, but the fact that he's absolutely brilliant when he gets his hand on the ball. I want you to comment on him, and will we see him throughout the Six Nations, not just is he going to come in for the odd appearance, but also Johnny Sexton. He's 36. He is still playing some good rugby, but how do Ireland evolve without him?
Well, to start with Michael Lowry first, I suppose, Tom, if you look at Morgan Parra in the recent Ulster-Claremont game, and you don't see that man making, I know he's at the outer end of his career, but Michael Lowry skinned him badly, and you don't see that. So you can see somebody explosive there's a swashbuckling nectar definitely to his game, but there's a confidence to his game, and confidence comes, I think, in the back three, of which I never played, but it's the confidence that his teammates won't embarrass him, so he can take those chances, knowing that if he gets into a bit of hot water, there's somebody going to come in and support him. And I think that's one of the things you see with Ulster and the Irish side. I think we're not going to see a huge amount of him because the embarrassment of riches in the Irish back three. I was just kind of trying to jot down who my starting back three would be. Hugo Keenan's, he seems like he's 50 caps. He's still in the teens in terms of caps. Earls has to get a start, and then you've got Balak Clune. You've got a lot of quality players. Larmer coming through, and Jacob Stockdale's obviously injured. James Lowe, there's a question mark over injury, etc. So I'm not so sure. I think the Italian game you might see him. As for Jonathan Sexton, I think Ireland play at a different level when he's playing at 10. I think under the Joe Smith era, I think his personality and his importance suffocated an awful lot of what the other players were doing. In other words, they kind of had to look for his permission to do something. Whereas I think the environment now, what Andy Farrell and his coach and Tickett have found a brilliant balance. He's clearly the best out half in Ireland, arguably the best out half in these islands in many ways. He's too valuable to relegate into a bench position, but maybe in time that will come. I think Ireland are too good with him playing at 10, and there's question marks over Carberry, injury-wise, obviously, as you can imagine. Jack Carthy down at Connacht has had a brilliant season, and I think what Carthy is capable of doing without the same horses in his front five is chopping and changing how Connacht play, and I think there's an awful lot of that in Leinster, and there's an awful lot in that in what Ireland are doing as well.
Well, what there certainly is in Leinster, and I watched with, not amazement, but it suddenly dawned on me when they substituted the whole of their front row, that actually, a bit like France, it's almost interchangeable. You've now got 6 players who are very good in their positions. They're very good technically in the set. They're mobile, they're dexterous, the physical and so on. So, I would. Do you think they're probably the equal or the best set of 6 front rows in this tournament?
They're super. I think with Porter going from tight to loose head, I don't know what you think, Brian, but I think that
he's done well because it's not easy.
But I think he started off as a loose head, you see, and this guy's a freak in nature. Like when he got to something like 300 kgs on the squat in his 19, 20 years of age, the fitness guy said, that's enough. You don't need to get any stronger. He's powerful. But going to loosehead, I think, has allowed him, I think he's almost more important than Tadhg Furlong. Tadhg Furlong does some outrageously talented things. But if you had a sheet of paper and you analysed Porter with every minute that goes by, what he's contributing to the overall team performance is extraordinary. It's just relentless what he's doing, and he's involved so much. And I think the expectation in Leinster, if you play for Leinster, there's a good chance you'll be a Lions Test player. You'll definitely be an Irish player, and you'll probably win European things. The standard is so high, and the expectation of players is so high. And I think you're right. I think that front row. Starting or finishing, but certainly the starting front row is a pretty formidable unit.
Liam, the way the fixtures fall this time is quite strange in a way, because Italy have got France and then England. So without being dismissive of them, in the best possible way, those 2 teams are likely, almost certainly, to have at least 1 win, maybe 2 wins. Now, the way yours fall, you've got a Welsh team at home which is affected quite badly by injury, so you don't know what's coming necessarily. And then you've got France. So it could go well. You could be 2-0 up and in the challenge, or you could be 2-0 down. And this is this is the unusual nature this time round, the way the fixtures have fallen. It could be the case that everyone has just won one, or it could be the case that two of the bigger nations are 2-0 down and then desperately scrapping not to come fourth and fifth, because that's the way the tournament goes. It is, quite a short thing, and you cannot afford to get off to a bad start. Certainly, in round two if you've not done it in round one. So, how are you? Are you happy with the way the fixtures have fallen for Ireland this time round?
Well, just by way of a way of getting, we're playing Wales round one, and that's total unknown unknowns. Like, they were championship winners last year, and now the entire nation of rugby has been almost written off. So, and you think as well, Scotland, we're actually playing Scotland last, but Scotland won in Paris and won in London, and in doing so, they still came fourth in the competition. For me, France is the dark horse. Whether they can show the discipline of consistency of their game plan under the pressure, and I'm not so sure they're ready to do that. Dupont is back from a relatively long term. He got injured in December. They're still questioning about their selection, but I think that France game is our pivot game. We will play in the second, and all your points are hugely valid. What's really going to be interesting is, will Henderson and Ryan be fit enough to play that? Will Tyg Byrne have a starting slot in France? You think of Vilmus and all these monsters that France have, and the Irish selection is going to have to be adjusted in some shape at the front 5 point. The two second row, the 4, 5 and 6 will probably be the positions that will rotate somewhat throughout the competition. To your very point, how do you keep that momentum going with the wildly different challenges? Like Wales, who knows what's going to turn up in Dublin, and then away in France. And then Italy, of course, the advantage, we played them third up, which means that they'll be pretty battered and bruised by that stage. So to be fair to them, Ireland should be able to, and we've a week's break between those games, should be able to, Michael Lowry and these guys should be able to get a game and have a pretty successful venture as well.
Last one, Liam. Everyone raised this question. What is acceptable for Ireland in this tournament, and what is not?
Well, you got to take into account Rugby World Cup, COVID, fitness levels. There's a lot of players, we don't know how fit they are. They haven't played. The European competition has traditionally been an enormously important part of our preparation for Six Nations. That's kind of, very different from the English system. And that's so we're not 100% sure. COVID was very difficult on the Munster players over the period for a variety of reasons. We've got crowds back, etc. I think we have a really good opportunity to challenge for the top. I'd still put France slightly ahead because we're playing them in Paris, but I think we should be talking about that competition as like 1-2, slot 1 or 2 as it transpires.
Well, Liam, we won't have long to find out now, will we? Which is great, isn't it? It'll be over far too soon, but always great to speak to you. Thank you very much, mate.
Okay, guys, take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. We touched briefly on Wales, Tom. Only for it's just really difficult to know how they will cope with the absence of players, like Alan Wynne-Jones, like Navidi, like Tipperick and so on. We know there is talent, a lot of talent, a lot of young talent. But the Six Nations, especially an opening game against Ireland, in Dublin, is a very different prospect from even the Autumns, which are not a free hit, but they don't play. They certainly don't have the cumulative effect. This is the point about the Six Nations. The start is so important because it really does determine how you're going to go in a totally disproportionate way. If you lose your first one, all panic sets unless you're very level-headed. The press get on you, the supporters get on you, and all of a sudden things have gone wrong, and you're saying, "Wait a minute, it's only one game," but this is what happens.
Well, any international side that's missing, I think they're over 720 caps.
Exactly, yeah.
8 Lions players, they're going to be struggling. If you look at what's gone on over the past few weeks, the Welsh regions have struggled. And generally there's a reflection then in the first opening couple of rounds of the Six Nations. I think Wales are going to find it really tough, especially going from being title winners to this weekend where they play Ireland. I think Liam was being fairly nice. I think Ireland will romp home in that one just because how they've bounced out of Europe. You know, I don't think Leinster played for 5 weeks because of COVID. And that rest means that actually now those players look like they're absolutely flying.
Yeah.
And then shorn of that experience, I think Wales will really struggle.
The Premiership is continuing. You were at the AJ Bell Stadium. It's full, wasn't it, to see Sale upset Leicester? Deserved?
Deserved. I don't think they came out of the blocks for the first 40 minutes. They weren't even at the races. I think they got to 21-5 down. They were in front of a full house. I was chatting to some of the marketing team on the way in, and they said, we've got a great full house here. We're looking for a great performance. At half time, I was like, well, this is completely the opposite. I think from Alex Sanderson's perspective, they're going to be really frustrated as a coaching unit, because you can see when actually Sale turn it on, from a physicality point of view, they're almost unplayable at times. 458 Dupreas running at you. They're all nearly 20 stone and 7 foot tall. And when they turn it on, it makes AJ McGinty's ability at 10 just brings him into his own, because there's spaces all over the place. Leicester shifted Freddie Burns onto the bench. They took him off. And actually, for me, that was a key turning point, because they brought Bryce Hegarty in from fullback and a young player in a tight game. I think that was a bad mistake for them. They ended up losing.
Well, it's strange, because we saw this week, we saw the 13th beat 3rd, 10th beat 1st, 8th beat 2nd. So you're starting to see the impact on sides like Quins, whose championship winning form last year, I think was predicated quite a lot on the fact that he didn't have Don Brandt and Marcus Smith involved in England duties. And this time around, they've got their Marchant and Northmore's gone. Liner's gone now into the squad. So you're starting to see the sides that have genuine depth. I mean, real depth at in their squad, and they're not necessarily teams you think about.
No, but what an opportunity for some teams like Bath, like Bristol, that have struggled this season.
Yeah.
And, we saw the performance of Nathan Hughes on Friday night against Quins. He's almost got an opportunity now to revitalise his career, and he certainly set the standards. I think Bath will be licking their lips at this opportunity.
Yes. Well, Saracens remain the bookies' favourites for the Premiership, but they're going to have to do it without Mark McCall, who is going to miss the remainder of the season on medical grounds. And if Mark is listening, or someone who knows he's listening, we wish you all the best, Mark. Hope everything's fine and you can come back as soon as you want to. What impact will that have at Sarries? They're a very well-run club. I can't imagine all the systems are down to McCall at this stage in their development. No,
I imagine he's almost like an orchestra conductor. He's just there pulling the strings here and there. Joe Shaw's obviously head coach and has done a fantastic job alongside Ian Peel, but you've got then the likes of Kevin Sorrell and Adam Powell, who are Saracens through and through. They've built this team over a number of seasons, and that's what provides them with that level of consistency, that high level of performance. They know exactly what they expect. Yes, they'll miss Mark McCall. I'm sure he'll be touching base with them from time to time, but it's been left in good hands.
Well, that's all we have time for this week on Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph. Big thanks to my co-host Tom Main, to my guests Ellis Genge and Liam Toland for joining me. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can check out all our previous ones by subscribing to the Full Contact podcast channel. And this includes last week's chat with the former Scotland scrum half Rory Lawson about the threat that the Scots could pose to England this weekend. When we get back next week, we'll have had one round of the Six Nations, and as everyone knows, nothing ever goes to plan in the Six Nations. So whatever we said here, I put with a big caveat behind that, so don't hold me to any of it. We'll be back. Look, join us, but until then, it's goodbye.